The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I have a very disturbing and unusual story out of Cologne, Germany to discuss with you. There are countless reports that women were sexually assaulted in what was a possible coordinated series of sexual assaults and muggings in downtown Cologne, Germany on New Year's Eve. Authorities and media were accused of sort of covering up the initial indications that, according to police, the overwhelming majority of the alleged perpetrators were Muslims of Arab and North African origin. There were 60 complaints filed to police, a third of which were linked to sexual assault. And Cologne's mayor, Henriette Reker, called an emergency meeting of high-ranking security officials yesterday, saying her aim is to ensure that the city center does not turn into a lawless zone. And the descriptions are that 500 to 1,000 men, described as drunk and aggressive, were believed to have been behind these attacks on people basically just partying on New Year's Eve in the center of the West German city. Whether they were working as a group or individual groups or just individuals, not totally clear. There's an ongoing investigation, and there's so much to discuss here, Lewis. Number one, we have this issue that there is an accusation that the origin of these individuals was being suppressed in initial reports of the story.
Yeah, and considering the climate right now, I mean, I can see why they might want to do that. They might not want to cause a stir, to create fear, to increase animus towards the Muslim community.
Right.
And, you know, that's fine. I mean, no, you know, I shouldn't say that. It's not fine. I mean, this needs to be let out. This needs to be reported on.
You're saying
accurately.
You understand not wanting to increase animus against the community broadly, but that doesn't justify.
Right.
Yeah.
Covering this up and trying to hide the facts is not the right thing to do. It seems that what we're talking about here is true. It seems that they are of, you know, Muslim origins or practicing Muslims or who knows. But, you know, these men come from a world where men do whatever they want to women, and women, you know, are generally crapped on. In my opinion, that's the world of Islam. So, of course, not all of the world of Islam, much of the world of Islam, before people jump down my throat here. So, yes, you know, you just report the facts, and whatever happens, happens. The truth is the most important thing.
So that's part one of the controversy. Part two of the controversy, and I really want to dig into this, is that Mayor Henriette Reker made some comments in reaction to the assaults that have angered a lot of people. She suggested that women adopt a so-called code of conduct to prevent future assaults. And the crisis management team said that there should be a code of conduct for young women and girls. And Mayor Reker said that the existing code of conduct is going to be updated online, etc. And this suggests, number one, maintaining an arm's length distance from strangers. Number two, sticking within your own group when you're out in public, asking bystanders for help or to intervene as witnesses, and to inform police if you're the victim of such an assault. At face value, this is not crazy, other than the idea of keeping strangers at arm's length. Yeah, keeping strangers at arm's length. You're in public. How do you you walk around like this? You don't allow anyone. Doesn't really make sense. But
yeah, because that's going to stop someone from mugging you, right?
Right. These could be called sort of obvious suggestions to the extent that the first one isn't crazy, okay? But the anger is coming because the advice from the mayor and the public safety officials seems to be focused on the victims rather than the rapists. And Mayor Reker also said a better explanation to asylum seekers was needed about the meaning of these annual parties. That almost feels satirical. Like, hey, listen, if we just explain to them, hey guys, just so you know, Germany on New Year's Eve is not a day to sexually assault women. That seems like a laughable suggestion.
Yeah, the code of conduct should be for the people who did the assaulting. I mean, that's who needs, those are the people who need a code of conduct. Asking people for help when there's an assault happening makes perfect sense. Tell the police, makes perfect sense. But the code of conduct idea for the victims here is kind of part of that strict father, quasi-religious, you might be out of control and not wearing enough clothing mentality.
It somewhat is. And we've talked about this before, right? In the context of sexual assault, victim blaming versus sort of pragmatic advice and warnings to keep someone safe. The focus should be on the systemic issues that allowed this to happen. A group that possibly in a coordinated way allegedly carried out mass sexual assaults, a lack of police presence has been identified. That all needs to be top priority. But it's also not crazy for women to have a personal plan if the need should unfortunately come up. This is a never-ending conversation, personal responsibility versus victim blaming. We don't want to do victim blaming because it's outrageous and offensive and incorrect. Saying women in a particular neighborhood at night should not be alone, right? That's not blaming women who are alone in that neighborhood. That is just a sort of pragmatic piece of advice. Saying if women didn't dress provocatively, men wouldn't want to rape them. That is absolutely outrageous and an example of victim blaming. These are sort of opposite scenarios. Many of these are sort of in the gray area.
Yeah, I mean, there are the suggestions that are just common sense, lower your risk suggestions.
Right.
And then there are the other ones. So
here's the important distinction, I think, Lewis, and tell me if this resonates with you. And I've tried to reduce it to the simplest terms possible. Warning people that you should do these things to be safe is very different than blaming victims by saying you should have done those things and it is thus your fault that you were raped.
Now, what are you asking me?
No, I'm saying that's the simplest way I can sort of delineate the difference between victim blaming and sort of pragmatic warnings for people.
Yeah, I think so. So sometimes it's a fine line you're towing with the language you use, not you, people who make these suggestions.
That one uses.
Right. Anyway, that's it really.
Do you think that the code of conduct is offensive, or do you think that the wording is bad, but the idea of sort of pragmatic advice for how to stay safe makes sense?
I think even the word conduct is not the right word here. Conduct means how you conduct yourself,
right? How
you act. So code of conduct, I think, is not even the term we should use. I'm all for common sense, things to reduce risk and to avoid putting yourself in a dangerous situation. Yes, maybe if you are, unable to defend yourself, you shouldn't be walking through bad neighborhoods alone at night. That makes sense.
Now, of course,
code of conduct.
If you live in those neighborhoods because of, for example, financial issues, and you don't really have a way of avoiding being in that neighborhood at night because you're working two jobs, that's when these sort of pragmatic bits of advice can start to become a little bit condescending and patronizing. When someone says, listen, I would not be working at midnight and I would not be living in this neighborhood were I able to earn a living wage, for example. And we have to be sensitive to that. That's a very realistic situation.
No doubt. Yeah. And, in this particular instance, this might have been organized. You have tons of people in a street partying.
Yeah.
You have other people intermingling. There's a lot of drinking going on. There's a lot of confusion, big crowds. It's nighttime. And, this is very different from the normal scenario that we see when there's individual instances of this type of thing.
Final point, the focus should be on the alleged perpetrators, not the victims. Respected statistician and polling guru Nate Silver says the chance of Bernie Sanders winning the Democratic Party's nomination is close to zero, and that Donald Trump has a better shot at being the Republican nominee than does Bernie Sanders of being the Democratic nominee. Nate Silver correctly predicted the election results of all 50 states in 2012. I did too, by the way. I think if you just went by state polls, it wasn't that difficult to do. And he told Adweek that Hillary Clinton will likely win the Democratic nomination unless there's some sort of renewed scandal or a health problem that really changes things. He said, quote, I could see Bernie Sanders winning a few states. New Hampshire is still very close, but Clinton's chances have to be in the range of 90 to 95%. Trump has more of a chance than Bernie. Not thrilling, Lewis, to many progressives.
No, I don't like hearing that, but I think that's the kind of the view that we've had for a while. It's what the data suggests. It's unfortunate. I mean, could he be wrong?
He absolutely could be wrong. We'll talk to Bill Scher about this a little bit later today. Nate Silver also said that Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump's chances of winnings are also incredibly low, and he says they will have more detailed statistical analyses of these probabilities very soon, saying about Trump, I don't think his chances are zero. You have to be very careful about saying they're zero, but I think they're lower than 20 or 25%. Maybe they're 10%, maybe they're 8%. I'm not sure, somewhere in that range. So we now have experts, Lewis, with excellent records at predicting elections with conflicting predictions. Nate Silver, 100% accurate in 2012, says Bernie will not win. Western Illinois University, successfully predicting every single presidential election since 1975, says Bernie Sanders will win. One of the experts is going to be wrong here.
Yeah, well, I guess we could look at when are they providing this information? At what point are they making the prediction? It seems that at Western Illinois, they make these predictions relatively early.
Right. But they've still been right.
They've still been right, yeah. And so, yeah, you're right. I mean, usually Nate Silver waits a little while before he tells us who is going to be the president. And so
he seems to think that it is just so unlikely that Trump or Bernie will be the nominees that even without looking at whether it's an 8 or 20% chance, that he's comfortable saying something. And that I'm not writing off Nate Silver by any means. I'm merely pointing out that the so-called experts are not in agreement here with regard to their predictions. Let's take a break. I'm on Twitter at @dpacman. Lewis is on Twitter at @LewisMotamedy. Follow us, tweet us. We'll be back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show is not like other corporate media programs in that we are not funded by corporate media or big media conglomerates or big corporations. We're funded mostly by the audience. And I invite you to add your name, vote with your dollars, support our program. Go to davidpakman.com/membership to sign up today. Daniel Yuen is today's new member of the day. Daniel's a great guy. I couldn't think of a single bad thing to say about Daniel. Indiegogo supporter, member, all-around good guy. Join Daniel at davidpakman.com/membership and hear me sing your praises like I sang Daniel's today on a future program. It's 2016, and today is the first day of 2016 Hatriot Mail.
The right of the people to keep and bear hate shall not be infringed. Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman.
Right.
Because America. And because freedom.
Very, very aggressive on Hatriot Mail to start off the year. Okay, let's take a listen to this one together.
David Retarded Man should be your name. Common sense is not in your genetics. Your mother dropped you. And that drooling liberal idiot that sometimes is across from you seriously think that by accepting people that have been infiltrated by ISIS, and ISIS says they will use the refugees to bring terrorists into other countries, and you want to give them a nice big hug. Yeah, you're going to be hugging a stump, crying when they chop your head off. You two are pussies.
Absolutely the longest run-on sentence in the history of Hatriot Mail, Lewis, to start 2016. What is your analysis or interpretation of the fact that you are taking more and more heat in Hatriot Mail lately? Do you think that this is a sign that you are making an impact and people are really picking up on what you're saying? Or do you think something has changed and people are particularly disgusted with you lately?
I think it just means that more people are watching the show, and so more people are aware of me, and that leads to more patriotism directed at me.
Yesterday on Twitter, this is so funny. I didn't even mention this to you. Someone was tweeting to me about how they just couldn't stand what Tommy said on the show. And I was like, there was this multi-tweet rant about Tommy. And I said, who on earth is Tommy? Is Tommy a caller? Are they referring to a guest? And they were talking about Lewis. I mean, they referred to Lewis as Tommy. They were convinced that the co-host of the show was Tommy. And I said, I have no idea who that is.
Maybe they got that from my last name, Motamedy. Tommy.
Right.
That's the
Tommy
only thing I can think
Motamedy.
of.
Now that's a fake name if I've ever heard one before.
Yeah.
Hatriot Mail starting 2016 off strong, and we already have some absolute gems for you for the next couple of weeks. So it's going to be quite a year in Hatriot Mail. Election years are crazy years for Hatriot Mail, that's for sure. I've been waiting for Donald Trump to finally question whether Ted Cruz is eligible to be president of the United States. Donald Trump, one of the most well-known birthers, demanding, swearing up and down that we must see President Obama's birth certificate, the long form, not the short form, Lewis, because obviously anybody can fake a short form birth certificate. Faking the long form would be much more difficult. So I've been waiting for presidential candidate Donald Trump to ask for or question Ted Cruz's citizenship and eligibility to be president, and he finally has. Trump said in an interview with the Washington Post that Republican voters should think twice before voting for Ted Cruz because there could be challenges to his eligibility to be president, which could tie him up in court for several years. Here's a clip of Trump talking about the same thing in an interview.
What it all means, I know that other people are talking about it.
Donald Trump deflecting last night in New Hampshire. The frontrunner saying Republican rival Ted Cruz's natural-born citizenship is a question that only other people are asking.
People are worried that if he weren't born in this country, which he wasn't, he was born in Canada,
right,
and he actually had a Canadian passport along with a U.S. passport.
Trump said in an earlier interview with the Washington Post that Cruz being born in Canada could be very precarious for the GOP, asking Republican voters to think twice, saying, do we want a candidate who could be tied up in court for 2 years? That'd be a big problem. Trump hinting Democrats could take Cruz to court because the Constitution requires the president to be a natural-born citizen. The junior senator was granted citizenship by birth since his mother was an American citizen. But what constitutes natural-born for a president has never been tested in court.
I think I'm going to let my response stick with that tweet.
So Ted Cruz held dual U.S.-Canadian citizenship. He renounced his Canadian citizenship back in May of 2014. And Trump has sort of gone back and forth on this. First, he said, oh, it could be problematic. But then last September, he said, oh, lawyers have checked it out and it's absolutely clear. I have to be very clear here. I want clarity this evening. I applaud Donald Trump because it would be hugely hypocritical to go after President Obama along birther lines and not go after Cruz among birther lines. After all, President Obama was born in the United States. I happen to believe both Ted Cruz and President Obama are eligible to be president. But a very superficial analysis tells us that Ted Cruz's situation is more questionable than President Obama's, merely along the lines of the definition of natural born. He was granted U.S. citizenship in spite of being born in another country because of the citizenship of a parent. That's slightly more complex than President Obama being born to a U.S. citizen mother in the United States. I believe both are eligible, but you've got to go after Cruz. If you ever said anything about Obama, you've got to be going after Cruz.
Well, he's kind of passive-aggressively going after Cruz, right? Because he's saying, I believe Cruz is eligible. Cruz, was a U.S. citizen. But he's saying, okay, well, the Democrats might go after him. This could be a problem. He might be tied up in court.
Birther Democrats are going to cause a problem.
Yeah, birther Democrats, which, actually, I think if he were to become the president, would be fine. Let's be as immature as the Republicans were during Obama's presidency, create distractions and just make noise.
I'm going to go a step further, Lewis. Until Ted Cruz produces his mother's birth certificate, I won't believe that he's eligible. She is his only connection to America. Go Trump, make America great again. It'll be terrific. It'll be absolutely terrific.
I actually heard that she's from Pluto.
Which is not even a planet anymore. I mean, if she was from another planet, fine. Pluto is not even a planet anymore. That doesn't make any sense to me. That's certainly nothing natural born about that.
Oh, Dave, an expert told me. Someone who knows.
Hillary Clinton bluntly addressed a Republican state representative who heckled her about Bill Clinton's alleged sexual improprieties at a town hall in New Hampshire. This is New Hampshire State Rep. Catherine Prudhomme O'Brien, who said she became a Republican after the scandals of the Clinton years. I'm going to play the clip for you. At the beginning, you can't really hear the woman in the audience, State Rep. O'Brien. You can't really hear her. You'll hear Hillary's response to her. But then immediately afterwards, CNN interviewed the woman. Let's take a listen.
let's start with the questions, and I'll try to get as many in. Well, I'm going to call on people. Wait a minute. I'm not going to take your question because other people have been Yes, go right there. Okay, let me see. Right back there, this man right there here we go, right there. You are very rude, and I'm not going to ever call on you. Thank you.
Love it.
I asked her how in the world she can say that Juanita Broaddrick and Kathleen Willey are lying when she has no idea who Juanita Broaddrick is, because she told me this summer that she doesn't know who she is and she doesn't want to know who she is. And how can she assess that they're lying, which is what she told someone last month? What? And she says that
just fell backwards.
She says that rape victims should be believed. I agree with her. That's true. They should be believed, and you should assess what they're saying. She doesn't even want to assess it.
Why does this issue matter to you?
Because I'm a rape survivor myself. Of course it would matter to me. And as a state representative, I have constituents who tell me that they're drug addicts because they were sexually assaulted and nobody did anything.
What is the connection between drug addiction stemming from sexual assault among State Rep O'Brien's constituents to Hillary Clinton's discussion or not discussing Bill Clinton's sexual affairs? I just don't understand the connection here.
Yeah, it seems she's reaching. She wants to take the Clinton machine down. What else is there?
The other question, and I just do not understand what the explanation is. She says she became a Republican. She was a Democrat. She became a Republican because of the affairs of Bill Clinton. Can you imagine? Would a Republican who doesn't like the fact that, I don't know, George W. Bush was an addict before being a born-again Christian, would that make a Republican say, I am now a Democrat? I mean, that's laughable, right? I could understand women saying, oh, I won't vote for Hillary because, I don't know, she enabled her husband's sexual affairs. Okay, fair enough. But vote for Bernie then, or vote an empty ballot. You're going to go and vote for Ted Cruz because of Bill Clinton having an affair? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, how does the Democratic president having an affair make you change your entire belief system?
It doesn't make any sense to me. And this was just a very flaccid attempt at making Hillary Clinton look bad in a room mostly of her own supporters, and I think it backfired pretty significantly here.
Yeah, I don't think she looked good. I mean, you are in a room full of Clinton supporters. What did you expect the response to be from the crowd? When Hillary said you're rude, they loved it, and she kind of did come off as kind of rude.
Yeah, I mean, if you watched as opposed to just listening to that, you can see her gesticulating in the middle of the room and just making an absolute fool out of herself, and Hillary Clinton right to ignore her. I don't know what the point of all this is, and if someone having an affair will make you change your political party so quickly, I would question whether those are really political beliefs that have any meaning to you whatsoever. After the break, we will talk to Bill Scher. Does Bernie Sanders have a chance? Does Ted Cruz have a chance? Does Marco Rubio have a chance? And is Jeb Bush completely done? All of those questions and more, we will talk to Bill Scher after the break.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to welcome Bill Scher back to the program. He is senior writer at Campaign for America's Future, also a contributing editor at Politico. Bill, so much to talk about. Let's start on the Democratic side. The most recent polls I've looked at, and I actually have not seen anything more recent than a poll taken December 21st. I don't know if you've seen more recent polls, shows Hillary Clinton averaging nearly 54% on the Democratic primary side, Bernie Sanders at 32%. Give us a sort of sober assessment of Bernie's chances at this point.
Well, I certainly put my money on Hillary. I have for a while. I never saw in the polling data evidence of mass antipathy towards Clinton. There's a lot of love and like for Bernie, and I think wide acceptance of his sort of basic critique. But if you're going to take out an establishment frontrunner the way Obama did to Hillary in 2008, there has to be a real widespread impetus to do that. In 2008, it was the Iraq War vote. That's now in the rearview mirror. There's certainly people out there that think Bernie is the more progressive choice, would have the most impactful change on the political system. But there isn't that same level of disgust if Hillary's the nominee, and I think that's lacking for Bernie right now.
What's your sense of the hypothetical matchup polls that we've seen of Hillary and Bernie Sanders, each in these hypothetical matchups against some of the Republican contenders? I've read some suggestions that at this point, those hypothetical matchups are essentially worthless in terms of figuring out who's really the more viable candidate.
Yeah, I wouldn't use that as a gauge. Now, Bernie is, because you can find certain polls where Bernie does better than Hillary in general election trial heats. Now, that is probably because Hillary has taken the far bigger brunt of negative media coverage over the past year than Bernie has. I know a lot of the Bernie fans out there feel he gets the short end of the stick media-wise, but I think it's hard to argue that Hillary's gotten a free ride from the press here. There's a lot more negatives that get raised, and I think that gets reflected in the trial election, in the trial heats. But that doesn't really tell you what that matchup's going to look like when you're actually in the general election. In the fall of 2016, there's a lot more engagement that would go on that would raise negatives or raise positives on both sides. So now it's all fair and proper for Bernie to make that case now. I mean, he's still viable. He wants to make the case to the public that, look, you're not going on a flyer voting for me. I'm not just an idealistic pick. I have an economic critique that transcends ideological boundaries. I can reach out to some of those angry Trump voters who want to stick it to Wall Street or don't like the trade deals. So he's going to try to make that case. And look, Iowa, Hillary's got the leg up in Iowa. Bernie's got the leg up in New Hampshire right now. If Hillary wins Iowa, as the polls say she will, that Bernie support in New Hampshire might prove to be a little soft, and Hillary could then run the table. But
at the same time, though, Bill, isn't it possible that when you look at, if Hillary wins Iowa 55 to 45 or 60 to 40 or something like that, that's not a huge win when we're talking about delegates, right? And then we could go into New Hampshire, and even if Bernie Sanders has a slight slide in support, we could still be talking about 50-50 going into primaries number 3 and 4.
Oh, and Bernie has a lot of money. He's his fundraised very well. He doesn't have something else he has to go do. If he has the resources to stick around, he's going to stick around and amass as many delegates as he can,
right,
and try to influence the convention. Even if he's short of the nomination, he wants to be able to say, look, I speak for a large contingent of the party, and the party should reflect my views. So even if Iowa and New Hampshire is a split, or even if Hillary wins both, the delegate allocation is proportionate. So Bernie has plenty of incentive to stick around. And there's also the chance that, Iowa's a caucus state, generally low turnout. More committed people tend to show up on a cold winter night to stick around in a gymnasium for 2 hours while you hear a bunch of meaningless speeches before you have to stand in your corner and say who you're for. There's always a chance that Bernie's supporters are more committed than Hillary's supporters, and he pulls off an Iowa surprise. And if that happens and he wins New Hampshire, that's a whole other ballgame. Now, I think Hillary might still gut it out in the end, but that would certainly last for a lot longer than if Hillary won 2, or if they split the first 2 and then Hillary won, South Carolina and Nevada, which is probably more likely.
All right, let's talk now a little bit about the Republican side. Latest Real Clear Politics average of polls: Trump 35, Cruz 20, Rubio 11, and Ben Carson increasingly not a factor, under 10%, 9.7%.
That's national, right?
National polling. Okay, question number 1, and you're already getting at sort of the issue I want to get at. Do these national polls even matter, or should we just be looking at the first 4 primary states on the Republican side right now?
Right now, we're less than a month from Iowa. National polls, quite meaningless. Now, I wrote a piece in Politico back in November arguing that Jeb Bush was this cycle's John Kerry, in that 27 days before Iowa, John Kerry was polling 4% nationally, being totally written off, and only doing marginally better in Iowa. He still wasn't leading Iowa. But in that month before Iowa, that's when Howard Dean and Dick Gebhardt went at each other. You know, essentially it was a murder-suicide operation by Dick Gebhardt to take out Dean and clear the path for Kerry. So, you know, Trump right now, he's ahead nationally. He's not ahead in Iowa. Iowa Republican caucus, very dominated by social conservatives, not Trump's natural base, much more Ted Cruz's territory. That's why he's leading in Iowa right now. And again, polls can shift in a month. I think Iowa is tailor-made for Ted Cruz, but who knows what Oppo research is going to crop up between now and then. But I certainly think we're seeing the end of the Trump phenomena. I don't think Iowa is tailor-made for him. And once he loses something, he is, by Trump logic, a loser, and hard to then recover from that. Because anytime Trump is something dumb, his response is, well, I'm ahead on the polls. So once you've lost something, that argument fails to be at your disposal.
Yeah, but now, Bill, so in reference to the piece you wrote about Jeb Bush, what's the date at which you're comfortable saying Jeb Bush will take this thing over?
Well, Iowa's not tailor-made for Jeb Bush either.
Right.
So I don't think he's going to win there.
No.
He is blessed with extremely low expectations right now. So he arguably doesn't have to win either Iowa and New Hampshire so long as he's showing some upward mobility. You know, let's say Jeb places a decent 4th in Iowa, and then he does a decent 2nd in New Hampshire. You're not going to write him off at that point because he's moving forward.
Right.
And after that, for the Republican side, I think I know South Carolina and Nevada are opposite dates for Democrats and Republicans, but I think South Carolina is next for the Republicans, more conservative territory, whereas Nevada has more Latinos. Perhaps Jeb might do a little bit better there. But one of the things that we can't know just yet is which faction of the Republican Party consolidates and which splits. Or do they both split? Or do they both consolidate? Right now, the hard right is split between Trump and Cruz. The more moderate establishment side split between Rubio, Christie, Jeb, and to some degree Kasich in New Hampshire. There's an argument out there that that Cruz is in the driver's seat because he's looking good in Iowa, and the establishment's not consolidated on one side. So Cruz could maybe eke out a New Hampshire win with 25% of the vote, the way Pat Buchanan did in 1996. But now, remember, Pat Buchanan didn't win the nomination. So usually at the end of the day, the establishment finds a way to get behind a single person and knock out a hard right candidate. And certainly if Cruz wins Iowa, the establishment's going to go into overdrive, figure out how do we stop this guy, because this guy is a dead loser in a general.
Well, listen, I'm still waiting for Ted Cruz's mother's birth certificate, and I'm sort of holding out on that. But in the meantime, you talked about consolidating, right? So last time you were on, we talked about the Trump national support, which was at the time was something like 24%. And you said, Bill Scher said, that you feel as though Trump is really
on me now.
Trump is really getting to his sort of ceiling of national support. And I sort of felt similarly. And then we saw him climb to 30% and 35%, and at one point 39%. His average right now nationally is about 35%. I agree with the general idea that Trump is not going to appeal to a majority of Republicans, and eventually they will sort of coalesce around someone other than Trump. But what is the ceiling? Do you think we now are at the Trump ceiling?
Well, I mean, if this is not his ceiling, he'd win the nomination. You know, if he stays at upper 30s for the rest of the cycle, you win. You know, right. You in a multi-person race, you win. I think that Trump. What I think is sort of distortive here is, earlier polls are very reflective of media attention. We're just barely getting to the place where people are starting to lock in and take their votes seriously. Up until this point, this is just fun. So, a pollster calls you and you're a conservative and they see who you're voting for. By saying Trump, you're saying, I want to keep this show going. I'm enjoying this show. Right. Don't turn the show off. It's not quite the same as I think this person should be commander in chief, and I'm going to show up on a cold Iowa winter night to ensure that happens. So I don't think what we see right now is predictive. I think it shows Trump is uniquely good at getting that media attention. He's not afraid of going as crazy as possible if it gets you ink, which is great for 2015. I still don't believe it's good for 2016.
Okay, last thing I want to touch on. If you, Bill Scher, known progressive, known liberal, etc., has to choose from the Republican candidates and say, honestly, if it has to be a Republican, here are the one or two people I would prefer be in there. I have said I would prefer Kasich or Rand Paul. What do you say?
This is who do I think would do a relatively decent job, or who do I think would be easiest to beat?
No. Who, if you knew it would be a Republican winning, who would you prefer? Who is least dangerous in your mind, or who would you say this is among candidates who do not represent my views? Here's the person who is the closest.
I would think that's clearly Kasich. I mean, Kasich is definitely the most sane. He has an element of compassion. You know, he has already made the case that he accepted the Obamacare expansion because he wanted to keep the mentally ill out of prison and live viable lives. He makes the case that prison shouldn't be homes for the mentally ill. I mean, that's something you don't see a lot of Republicans make. And there's plenty of things I don't like about John Kasich. But the fact that he's willing to say that within the Republican primary does speak to some level of decency.
All right. Well, so I think we agree on that. No surprise. Most progressives I talk to say if it had to be a Republican, it would be Kasich, or sometimes I hear Rand Paul, sometimes I hear Chris Christie. I don't think we're really going to get to that point with any of these candidates, so it's probably more of a hypothetical that will never really matter. We've been speaking with Bill. Oh, go ahead, Bill. Yeah.
Well, as I say, Christie's not out of it in New Hampshire. He's still in the mix there. I'm with you. I don't think he's going to go the distance.
No.
But you can't quite write him off just yet because he's got a little bit of mojo going.
Yeah, well, I guess I've made a mistake then by writing him off, but I'm going to write him back in based on Bill's recommendation. Bill Scher, senior writer at Campaign for America's Future, contributing editor at Politico. Bill, thank you.
My pleasure.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We've been talking about brain injury in football for years now. This is a huge topic. It's the subject of the new movie Concussion with Dr. Bennett Omalu, played by Will Smith. CTE, or chronic traumatic encephalopathy, has been studied mostly in older people because you need the person to be dead in order to look at their brain tissue in the detail necessary to diagnose CTE, these persistent brain injuries. So most of the people who have been diagnosed of it have been diagnosed posthumously somewhere between 45 and 80 years of age. However, we now know about a 25-year-old college football player who sustained more than 10 concussions during the 16 years that they played football at some level, starting from little kid football. That brain has been examined and evidence of CTE has been found. But it is even worse than that. The authors of a report published this week in the journal JAMA Neurology also note that the brains of athletes as young as 17 have shown focal lesions that suggest CTE, but they wrote widespread CTE pathology is unusual in such a young football player. This particular 17-year-old football player had some other issues going on that may be sort of confounding factors here, but the report is very clear in that these injuries are developing far sooner and at far younger ages than previously thought, Lewis. And we've talked many times about this issue. If you accidentally had a kid and you loved your kid and your kid wanted to play football, do you let them play football? And we often hear from parents that, okay, I'll let them sort of get it out of their system at a young age. They probably will never be good enough, statistically speaking, to really go that far. The damage can start quite early.
Yeah, and I think I would let my kid play football, Dave, if they were a kicker or a quarterback. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but I really wouldn't want my kid playing any other position. It's too dangerous, and you may go your entire football career without a concussion.
Sure.
It might not matter. All of those little hits add up. It's all cumulative. Yeah, people as young as 17, Dave, that's scary.
And the 17-year-old who had been playing football since something like age 8 had their first concussion. They actually had a concussion, which, as Lewis says, Just because you haven't had concussions doesn't mean you won't be the victim of CTE. It is a response that happens to the cumulative effect of hit after hit after hit, even if the individual hits are all subconcussive. I'm curious to see what the future holds for the NFL and for football in general. Parents are going to be increasingly apprehensive about letting their kids play football. How would a responsible, loving parent knowingly subject their child to something that now we have so much research? It shows that there are terrible consequences, including early death, including essential disablement. I mean, it is absolutely horrible. How can parents allow their kids to play?
Great question. I think we're already seeing kind of a PR campaign from the NFL and maybe other organizations trying to make football seem safer, family-oriented.
And they'll say,
fun.
we have the safest equipment, we have the new policies, it's the safest policy ever. And all of that may be true, but it still would not prevent the cumulative effect of the subconcussive hits. And before you get to the NFL, they don't have all of those same policies and all of the same equipment. So think about the damage that accumulates before you even make it to the NFL, which of course most people never will.
Right. It's a small, very small number of people. But if your kid went up to you and said, I want to play football, I love football, I want to play, but it's still your decision, what do you say?
I think I say no. I mean, I don't know how, as a parent of a kid, and I'm not a parent, I don't know how I say, sure, let's get you the pads and let's get you the helmet and let's go at it. I do not know how I'll allow my kid to do that. If my 8-year-old says I want to start playing football, I just don't see it.
All right. I don't know what I would say, but I think I'm leaning in that direction.
There's a form called FAFSA that prospective college students fill out if they want to be considered for federal student aid dollars. And over the last year, more than 56,000 students identified as homeless on the FAFSA form. But even that number is likely a big understatement because it doesn't include people who are homeless but could not verify homelessness as required by the FAFSA form. It doesn't include people who, for whatever reason, are homeless but never filled out the FAFSA form at all. And it doesn't include those who are intermittently homeless during college, maybe not at the time that they fill out the form, but later during the year they become homeless. So we talk about the problem of income and class mobility in the United States, really the problem of lack of income and class mobility. Higher education is actually one of the ways that people can rise up beyond their means that they were born into. So we should be going out of our way to ensure that if you've done the right things, if you have been able to get into college, if you aren't homeless and can actually focus on going to school and getting your degree, that you should be able to do that as opposed to suffering from this intermittent or persistent homelessness that college students are allowed to fall into. This is an absolute ethical, moral crisis that we have.
A country at our level of development, it just really should not be happening. And I don't think this is a problem you'll see in maybe any other country at our level of development with, at least that I would say with equal or better social development.
Well, Washington Democratic Senator Patty Murray introduced legislation which hopefully will fix some of the issues here. And among other things, and this is a really big thing, the legislation that Patty Murray proposed would ask colleges to improve outreach to high school students who fit certain descriptions of students likely to be homeless or at risk to be homeless. And in addition to that, you have to make it easier to verify homelessness. That's a problem with these FAFSA forms. And also, during summer breaks and sort of the January break, typically dorms are closed. You have to allow students to stay in the dorms. Why would you say, hey, great freshman year, we'll see you in sophomore year. Good luck finding housing during the summer. And I know people, Lewis, who had trouble during the breaks. Sometimes it wasn't homelessness per se, but it was their family was in transition, for example, or there were family financial issues and the home that they would have to go back to during the summer really didn't have room for them, right? They would have been sharing a room with 3 other people or whatever. If schools just let the students stay in the dorms during January, during winter break, and during summer break, that would also reduce the number of homeless college students drastically. That's a must do.
And that's something that they don't want to spend the money on. And yeah, it's ridiculous. I mean, why should they not be able to stay? We're talking 2 months here. What's the big deal?
Remember that Democrats and Republicans, very similar on many issues, but we do have one party which thinks it is moral or ethical or whatever to say people don't deserve health care unless they can pay for it. We have a group that says people don't deserve education or even housing unless they've gone through what we've arbitrarily determined are the right steps to earn that. This is a real problem. This is a difference between Democrats and Republicans, and we shouldn't forget that. We have a voicemail number. The number is 219-2-DAVID-P. I was thrilled to hear for the first time of the year, Lewis, from our new favorite caller, a classic caller from Bossier City, Louisiana, none other than Mr. Rondo Hicks checking in, Lewis. Let's take a listen.
Yes, David, this is Bossier City, Louisiana, Alonzo Hicks, continuing this bromance that we have between the two of us. I just wanted to, Happy New Year, you, 5 days, posthumously, or whatever, 5 days removed.
Right.
But, watched your show last night, and it was very, enlightening, and y'all keep up the good work. And I like that cohort of yours, too. He's really, Mr. Cool Mo D.
Absolutely. Louis Cool Mo D Motomedy. That's exactly his nickname growing up. Louis, it actually sounded like he said Alonzo Hicks in that particular voicemail rather than Rondo Hicks. But I thought it was Rondo Hicks. And it also sounded like he said Bossier City, Louisiana, as opposed to Bossier City, Louisiana. I don't know where this guy's calling from.
Well, we know who he is.
Yeah.
I mean, as a caller.
Yes.
And it's great to hear from him. A Happy New Year to you as well.
Absolutely. No question about it. Fantastic bonus show today. No time to even tell you about it. Sign up at davidpakman.com/membership, and we will speak to you then.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.